Um, I'm Judy Johnson. I'm a member of the Stewardship Commission, as you heard. And actually, Father Jake and I are tag teaming this. Dan forgot to mention you. I'm sorry about that, but Father Jake got the notoriety in the Catholic Messenger of promoting Stewardship Day, so people know. I grew up in a solidly Catholic family in a solidly Catholic neighborhood in a suburb in the Minneapolis area. And so everyone in my neighborhood, everyone in my family was involved in the parish. We didn't know the word stewardship back pre-Vatican II in the 50s when I was growing up, but it certainly was modeled for me at some point in my adult life when we were early in our marriage, began to hear about sacrificial giving and returning the treasure, as the bishop said before. And that's really spoke to me and began my stewardship conversion, understanding that what had been modeled for me, what I've been doing all my life, has deep theological roots, and really just sort of interiorizing that, and almost got very involved with stewardship, returning treasure, as soon as we heard about it, because I wanted to put my money where my mouth was and do what I felt I was being called to. And anyway, as the bishop was sharing how he came to this and things that were modeled for him and learning about stewardship through treasure, I thought our stories were very similar. In 1992, I started working at the Diocese in the Religious Education Office, and it's just coincidental that that's the same year that the pastoral came out. But as I began to be more involved in growing as a mature adult and working in the church arena, I really began to understand the stewardship pastoral and the call to conversion. And here I am, member of the Diocesan Stewardship Committee, and what shall I say, eager and active participant in my own parish on stewardship. I'll let Father Jake introduce himself a little bit too.
The bishop's story and mine is about the same. Grew up on a farm. There was only 3 of us, so less mouths to feed. But this reality of growing up in that sort of environment where everything has to be a gift on a farm, because you plant the seeds, you do not know whether you're going to have a harvest at the end of the summer. The cows are pregnant, but you don't know if they're going to survive. We think we're going to have enough hogs for the contract at the end of the year, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. So much like we shared, it was a part of our life, but it wasn't later on when I started focusing on my own vocation, because that's where this bishop's pastoral letter begins, is that all of us are called by God to serve Him and serve others. And when you dive into your personal vocation and you decide, and literally it's a personal decision, to be that disciple who follows where God calls you, the automatic response has to be a stewardship way of life. Because if you are called and you make that choice to follow Christ, what gifts will the Lord ask of you to share for Him and for His community? And that quotation the bishop used was just amazing, is that the Lord gives us talents, but the gifts we give back to Him is the use of that talents. So that's how I became a priest. I would say that how I'm on the Diocesan Stewardship Commission is still a mystery. I just know I was called one day, and the letter was sent by the bishop for the appointment, and I called Dan Evener and I said, I didn't know this even existed. So I'm growing into this role and also just helping me process how stewardship needs to happen, not only within the parish I currently am assigned to, but also to be a good model for my brother priest. Because as Judy's now going to introduce the document, this is something that truly pulls together all aspects of our lives as mature disciples who have God's call placed in their lives. So with that, we'll have her kind of lay out the document, and then I'll talk through a few things in regards to the sections.
Well, the document came about in the late 1980s when the bishops particularly were recognizing some coming changes in the church. And some of it was, how are we going to get the human resources, the financial resources that we need to go forward as church. Also, you know, the American culture was changing. And not like the Middle Ages where the priests were the only educated ones. You know, the laity have good resources at their disposal, they have education. So how do we empower the laity? How do we use their gifts? How do we recognize the role of women? How do we affirm racial, cultural, ethnic diversity? And so the Bishops' Conference formed an ad hoc committee to kind of begin to address this. And many thought that what the framers of the document would do would come up with some grand fundraising techniques, some innovative fundraising tips, and write it all up, and we'd all know how we could move forward to fund the ministries and the programs and services that we as church wanted to provide. As you know, I mean, we're as preaching to the choir kind of, but the document isn't that at all. And the stewardship's not about money, and it's not a sophisticated money grab, and it's not a new name for stuff we've been doing for a long time, and it's not a program to implement or a mechanism for recruiting volunteers. It's all of that. That happens, yes, but it's that and much more. And this profound document that the bishops came up with really lays out a vision and extends an invitation to everyone in the pew to be the people God wants us to be holy people. And really, holiness is at the heart of the document. So the document has 6 sections. There's an introduction and then 5 other sections on various, what they see as facets of stewardship. And they lay out in the introduction basic, if you will, foundational principles. We as bishops, when we wrote this is what we were thinking exists. And the bishop talked about it in his own talk. Each baptized person is called to be a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. And the deeper you go into following, more in love you are with Jesus and go into following Jesus, that's a conversion experience. I think he and I both talked about that when we talked about how we came to know stewardship. But conversion isn't just a one-time aha moment, usually. It's a growing thing, and we grow deeper and deeper into conversion. It's not a one-time quick fix. And then, deeper than that, stewardship has the power to change how we live our lives. So the bishops laid that out as, this is the groundwork. This is what we think, is just the basis for beginning. And then they talked about 3 realities in our modern American culture. And the first was the challenge. They call it a challenge because this document is addressed to citizens of a wealthy, powerful nation. And it is a challenge to live the life of a Christian in today's secularized, modern American society. And the bishops recognize that. But we have a choice. We have a serious duty to live out the mission of the church, to support the church, to grow into this conversion process and grow deeper in love with Jesus Christ. And if we do that, then the vision is we can transform the world. We can transform our parishes, we can transform the world. So all of this is put into the introduction, and then they go into the 5 other components, which Father Jake will talk a little bit about.
And truly why this needs to be a team presentation, because this document is not just for bishops and pastors. This is truly a document that is open to the entirety of the church. So therefore, it is something where a lay person can read this and get a very different take on what the bishops are challenging to, And then we as pastors and priests can look at this document and truly look at it maybe from a different perspective, but collectively, how do we return the good things to the Lord that He has given to us? So the first section begins with call, and that's the title of the section. Getting to the most fundamental reality, as I mentioned earlier, that each of us has a vocation, which comes from the Latin word to call. And our vocation is that place in our life where I tell the high school seniors that I teach that your happiness and peace will be found there, but you have to spend time in prayer and discernment and honing your gifts so that you can fulfill that vocational call. And because, as Judy said, the bishops realize the culture is changing, the call is harder to discern now than it ever has been in the past. And if you don't believe me, just look at how much we use our cell phones. Look at how much we spend our time filling our lives with noise. Because this call begins with that personal relationship with Christ that really has to be honed through silence, but also within a community. And that's what the bishops talk about, is that you have to realize your personal vocation, but this call, has to be confirmed by the church. So it's something that individually the Lord calls us to, but it's also something we collectively do as church. Realizing that the call the Lord has placed on our hearts is something that the church must hold up and support. But finally, the church has to give it its blessing. Because everything given to an individual is also given in service to the church. So the second section goes into Jesus' way. So you're convinced of that call. How do you refine that call? By really going through that process of conversion and truly becoming that disciple of Christ the Lord is calling you to. Now, really wonderful quotes in this section that I think, again, are worthy of your holy hour, your time in prayer. But one that really spoke to me was giving up means receiving more. Giving up means receiving more. So when we go through this conversion process, it's not a zero-sum game. It truly means as we're going through the conversion process, becoming more and more Christ's disciple, the Lord wants to give us more. And once we've had that vision, that true change in our lives, you get to the third section, living as a steward. And this is where this section is the most, I would say, nondescript, because each of us in this room are going to do it differently. The bishop does it one way, I do it one way, Judy has another way. But there are some universal things that have to be understood. That living as a steward means that you'll have your vocation, which is primary, but we'll also have many other aspects that go into that vocation. Our jobs, our families, all those things that are part of the vocation, that fundamental call, but they can either be a hinder to us being good stewards, or they actually can cause us to be more turned away from God and become, as the bishop described, more like God. This is my precious. This is the thing that belongs to me alone. So they really challenge living as a steward has to be something that you look at every aspect of your life. Keeping your eye on the prize of your vocation, but looking into all these things like jobs and careers. Now, one of the points that ends that chapter is this focus on the importance of work. That all of us are called to work. And there's references in sacred scripture about working out our salvation. But the fundamental reality is each of us need to do something in response to the Lord. What is your work? And that work is so important that you understand how that fits into your life as a steward. And then the fourth section, stewards of the church. So you're living as a steward, how can you be that steward in the church? And they give a lot of good examples, but fundamentally it's rooted in the Eucharist. A steward in the church understands that she or he is cooperating with the most fundamental aspect, and that is that Eucharistic ministry. The Eucharist being the source and summit, all the sacramental life that comes and flows from that Eucharist, and furthermore, how that sets the tone for everything we do. So an individual steward will plug into that stewardship of the grace of God that flows from the Eucharist and the sacramental life. And then finally, the last section just has more of, are you willing to commit to this challenge? Because the fifth chapter, the Christian Steward, knows that all these sections are going to be challenging and hard, but the joy of living out that call is one day, if not now, to see the kingdom of God being built up in your parishes and in your families, preparing for eternal life. So, broad strokes, but I know one thing that's really struck me about this document is it's probably one of the more hopeful documents you can read, because it's challenging us to see hope that God continues to give gifts, even though many times, what are the documents in the church coming out about? Response to racism, response to immigration, the response to this problem and that problem. This document is about God gives us good gifts. How are we called to truly respond to those good gifts?
So if you don't have a copy of the document and would like to get one, there are some in that basket. It's also available as a PDF on the diocesan website. And so if you're into that, you can download the PDF. It's easily obtained through Amazon for a very discounted price. I would recommend anyone who wants to know more, or even to just revisit it, because it lights my fire in a different way every time I go back to it. But 4 years after the document was written, the bishops did add an appendix to future editions. And a lot of this was to address that, fundraising business, and how do we take care of treasure in a way that follows the stewardship vision, but also is a reality in parish life, in church life. Appendix 1 is really just a summary of the document. It's written a little differently than the 6. It has the same content, but not in the same format. It's really easy to understand, and a good summary of it, helpful. So that's a way to get familiar with the document too, is to read Appendix 1. Appendix 3 is a list of resources, because the subsequent publication of the document is over 20 years old. Some of the resources mentioned there are out of date or out of print, but the resources were put there so that we'd have the how-tos, because we have the vision. Now, how do we help this along in the parish? Appendix 2 then is the biggest part of the appendixes, and it discusses stewardship as, all the things Father Jake's been saying. Collaborative, involves trust in God, calls for a commitment to learning more. It's lifelong, a conversion. It's a comprehensive approach. But then much of this section focuses on stewardship treasure and how we are to handle that promoting it in our parishes, and when we go to capital campaigns and annual appeals and that kinds of things, how we can do that in a stewardship vein. A key, I think, for us, element of Appendix 2 are 7 steps for essential steps for stewardship success in a parish. And we want to talk a little bit about how we think we're doing that at Our Lady of Victory in Davenport, Iowa.
And maybe just one kind of image to help you feel like this is not overwhelming. So I can speak, this is my second assignment as pastor. When you come in leadership roles, or sometimes you're trying to start new things at the parish, you want a program that's ready that you can enact. So when I was growing up, my grandmother made these beautiful chocolate cakes from scratch. Everyone wanted grandma's chocolate cake, but she'd always say, I need 2 days to make it. And none of us would take the time to watch the process, we just wanted the end product. So when we go through these 7 steps, we are just giving you the ingredients to the cake. Now, we think we have a good product at Victory, but we're still refining our recipe. Because we see a lot of good examples, but we have to figure out the recipe for ourselves. So this is not a Pillsbury Doughboy easy bake solution. These are just the ingredients that you have to take back to your parishes and figure out what works for you. The key point was what you saw with the Dumonts is lay witness. Emily, how did it go this year when you did your personal witness?
I think it went okay.
I thought you were great.
I think she did a great job.
I got to give a lay witness talk at our parish for the able diocesan appeal. And I kind of came from the perspective that I now work for the diocese, but I also worked at the parish. So I was talking about how your gifts can help both our parish and the diocese.
And the bishop did a wonderful witness this morning, talking about how we came to understand stewardship. We've used lay witnessing at Victory more than just the annual appeal. After kids came back from NCYC, the young people stood up there and said, wow, this is what I encountered. We have a children's offertory envelope thing where children can write their time and talent, how they use their time and talent for God this week, or put a little bit of money in the envelope and then bring it up special to Father in the basket. And when he says things like, it's the money isn't what's in there, isn't what's really important, we're acquainting kids with stewardship. And when he says, if children like to bring their envelope forward so they can, tell us how they use their time and talent for God, that's witness.
And it doesn't have to be the same personal witness, because it'll strike us all differently. So we had Emily do it, and who else did we have? I can't even remember now.
I don't either, but we had different speakers.
It was very different. So it's not having one person stand up at all your masses. If you have 3 masses, have 3 different lay people, 3 different personal talks. And also in the past, I've had seminarians stand up and give witness to what not only the annual diocesan appeal means to them, but also just parish life means. So that personal witness is important. Now, step 2 points to something that's near and dear to my heart, parish leadership. Because I am a pastor, and leadership has to be committed to developing stewardship within the parish. Now, sitting on the Diocesan Stewardship Commission for now a couple of years, one of the complaints is that we feel as if our leadership is not on board at our parish. We're really excited for this, we think this can be transformational, but our leadership is not there. And my response generally is that pray for that change. Because as I said, the document points to individual personal conversion that leads to a development of a stewardship way of life. So pray for that, and also challenge people. If stewardship is not the answer, what is the answer? And usually what happens, you hear crickets. Because there is no way to articulate this reality outside of either using stewardship or using some sort of gift of thanksgiving. It is what we have to do. So if leadership's not involved, make sure you just challenge them appropriately. What is the solution? Now, the other interesting piece is you've got to have some sort of committed group. So we have a stewardship group that constantly is keeping us moving forward as a parish. I try my best to interject into homilies in the bulletin articles. But stewardship is something that, again, if you're able to point to more and more attributes of your parish or your diocese or whatever organization you're part of, people start making those connections and it becomes more organic. Because many people, we did a survey where we just asked people, what do you do in the local community? Thousands of hours are being donated by parishioners, thousands of dollars, I'm sure, by parishioners of Victory outside of our parish. And we have to hold that up and say, that's good stewardship too. Now, as a pastor, I'd like a few of those dollars to come back to Victory. And furthermore, some of you, I'd like to get you more involved in our programs, but it's not just about what happens at our parish. It's about the totality of their life. Because again, if we believe that the Lord will continue to give gifts, even if it's sacrificial, they're doing that in the lives of their families. And we just may not recognize it in our parishes. So, parish leadership just needs to be truly consistent and constant in their communication on stewardship. And also, it can't be based on personality. One of my big things I've always learned throughout the leadership roles I've been in, both lay, military, and now as pastor, if it's based on Father J. Greiner, and I get moved or something happens to me, it's done. Or if Judy Johnson is in charge of the stewardship and she does everything, if something happens to Judy or she feels called to do something else, it can't die there. So you need a committee that's committed, has a group of people that will continue to pass on the torch of stewardship long after maybe the pastor who understood it a little bit better, the lay person who's been doing this for a long time, so that it continues. Now, and that's hard, because also we want to do that on our boards of eds, we want to do that on our finance councils, but if you really want this to grow in your parish, you've got to develop that leadership. And don't let the pastor be your excuse for not doing stewardship. The pastor wants stewardship, I guarantee you. Probably what he's hearing, though, is when you talk to him about stewardship, are you asking me to do one more thing? Or are you asking me to do something fundamentally different than I've done at my other parishes? So just work with pastor, work with pastoral associates, be persistent. Because they want this, even though they don't know it. And I'm convinced that the more we do diocesan events and really get to the heart of this, pastors will understand it better.
And also it's like,
No, we're fine.
But it's like, okay, pastor, do this thing. That doesn't come across very well, but we need to do this thing and I'll help. I'll be one of the leaders. That goes a long ways.
And also your willingness to go and get trained. Because that goes a long way with pastors as well. It's not only will I do this, but I will become the best I can at it. And we're like, God bless you, go on your way. So, individual witness, leadership, and these next 5 we'll go through pretty quickly. Hospitality, evangelization, and outreach. The document focuses on evangelization because without that fundamental conversion to become a disciple of Christ, you will not live stewardship well. So how do we do evangelization? Well, we make people feel welcome, a part of our community, so that they can hear the good news that we give to them. So all 3 of those are put together. We do hospitality okay. There's more that can be done, but opening doors, making sure people are there to welcome. But truly, where some of the evangelization and hospitality comes is when people are in crisis. So your parish really needs to respond in crises and do it well. Because that's where sometimes hospitality and outreach become absolutely important. But it's not something you forsake. And this is where within your staff as well as your parishes, remind them, you are the face of the parish. You are Christ to others. So staff, parishioners, volunteers, it all goes together. Step 3 is communication and education. On our website, we have something devoted to stewardship. We constantly have stuff in the bulletin about stewardship. As I said, constant, consistent communication about stewardship. The challenge, though, sometimes, again, is the education piece, because people don't have the time. So I've been wrestling with some things in my mind. Can we do some sort of online thing at Victory? So we revamped our website. We now have our OOE TV. How can we do something with maybe stewardship or another part of our parish where we all watch the same YouTube video, online forum, come together, what have you. So I think there's some ways to do communication education in regards to this. But if you sit down and lament, as we tend to do in parishes, that no one's showing up to your events, you're not being a good steward. All you're doing is you're practicing that negative behavior that does not pertain to that of a steward. A steward says, I provided all I was asked of the Lord. Apparently the people didn't need it. Praise be God. Move on to the next thing. Because, again, I think sometimes, especially in our role in outreach, we want a bumper crop. And as my father said, some bushels is better than no bushels.
It's kind of why we tried to do this, the pastoral as a self-study kind of thing. It meets the modern needs. People can do it in their own home, at their own time. You can do it in a day. You can do it in over a week or a couple of weeks if you want. To try to use formation tools that speak to where people are at.
Step 5, recruiting, training, recognizing the gifts of time and talent. Literally going out and asking people to be part of the parish. We do time and talent surveys every year at the parish, or at least we're in a rotation, trying to recruit new volunteers, trying to get more people involved. Recognize, though, that the personal invitation is always the best. You can do bold announcements and other things, but if someone is personally asked to be a part of the ministry, to give their time and talent, the chances of getting a yes are much, much higher, especially if you wear a Roman collar. And sometimes I have to be asked, Father, you need to go talk to this person to get them involved. Well, tell me a little bit about them first. Because that's the role of the pastor, is to make sure that there's other parts of my leadership in the parish. Because part of the problem, and again, this is on video forever, but part of the problem sometimes is parishes are built around the pastor, the whims and needs and what he wants. And what probably needs to happen more, if anything, if that's the case, then we break down that system and say, okay, how can we work together? Or, Father, go out and ask that person to help you, instead of complaining that nothing's getting done because you refuse to do it.
Well, another component too of this is job descriptions and adequate training. You don't just put a warm body into a, and thank yous, affirmations. At Our Lady of Victory, we have a thank you party every year for anybody who's done it's free. A nice evening of hors d'oeuvres and anybody who's done anything to live the life of the parish, and even homebound, who are the powerhouses of prayer. Or, okay, we're getting 5 minutes.
and everything is part of it. So recognizing all the different attributes that go into it. The last 2 steps are the more practical. Step 6 is making sure a stewardship of treasure is part of the life of your parish. So right now at Our Lady of Victory, we're having our annual renewal of treasure, where we ask parishioners to put in their pledge card on how much they're willing to commit over the next year. Now, I like to think we do it kind of more of a soft sell, meaning that, hey, we've done this for several years now, but if you're not familiar with this, as I wasn't in my previous parishes, you can do it a couple ways. One is I think you begin by just literally saying, if you want us to be that parish that accomplishes the ministries that you want, we're going to need some financial support to do it. Or, at the very least, we need to sit down and think how we can find the volunteers, what have you. So begin with, this is for ministry. Because when I was a lay person sitting out in the pews, it was for a very short period of time, but I always got frustrated when the finances drove ministry. Ministry should drive the finances. Now, it's hard, I know this, but the stewardship of treasure, if you do it well, helps you to get beyond that so people see treasure within a larger context. But then this last step is so important because once you actually get the treasure, you got to show the people that you're accountable with it. We do an annual report. We also do monthly giving. New this year is I provided a summary of all the ministry we did. 500 masses, 1,000 hours visited to the homebound. We just added up. So that is our way of saying to Our Lady of Victory, here's how we've been accountable with this, not only the time, talent, but most importantly, the treasure, so that you're willing this year, as we do our renewal, you're willing to do a little bit more. And just something that's, I'll get you in a second, Ken. Something that's immensely important is just realizing that the people have to understand your accountability too. Because not all of us can read spreadsheets. So this accountability has to be done in a way that people in the pew, at least most of them, can understand. Yes, Ken?
I've been into stewardship for years and years, long before the word was even shared. I thought about it years and years ago. And I followed it some. And Rapid City, South Dakota has got a stewardship program that's out of sight. I was going to travel out there for one of their weekends when the wife come down sick, so I was unable to do it. And then Wichita, Kansas, they got one that is phenomenal. Their stewardship went after people. And they got one parish, their parish participation quadrupled. Well, if you quadruple a parish, that solves a lot of these other problems. And Bishop Robert Bruce from Rapid City, he told me one time, he says, invite somebody out to lunch after church. Make a friend. And I believe in that 100%, and I've done that many a times. But I'll tell you what, not everybody wants to be a friend.
And just the personal invitation that Father Jake talked about before goes a long way. Personal invitation.
Yep.
It can make all the difference in the world, especially in the life of the person that you're asking, because 9 times out of 10, the Holy Spirit, unless I'm being planted, because sometimes I'm told that, Father, you gotta go do this. But there's been times where I've been struggling with something, I pray about it, and all of a sudden I'm walking through, I need to talk to you. I see that you're a young person who looks like you need something to do. I need you in religious ed. You know, Father, I was thinking about volunteering. Thank you. So sometimes we just need to open ourselves up to what some of the solutions are. And the diocesan models out there are pretty amazing. We are doing something a little bit different because we're trying to build up more of a subsidiarity. Let's go out to the parishes and see what we can do to help you, unless we get something, a different strategy going forward. And that's why we're having these days. So hopefully we can give tools to parishes in light of the bishop's guidance on how to do this in your parishes. And then we'll just see where we go from here.
I like Bishop Gruce's, it talks about intentional disciples and lively stewards. And I think that's the vision that the bishops try to communicate in their document. They extend the invitation to us, probably preaching to the choir, but invite you to let yourself be caught up in this dynamic, spread the word, share the document with people in your parish, and man, lively stewards can transform the world.
Has there ever been any initiatives to take a group to Rapid City or Wichita to study how they do stewardship? Or
You know, there's of course the national conference every year, and when it's in Chicago, we get some good participation from the Diocese of Davenport. Region 9, which is the states of Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, try to do a stewardship thing. There's other workshops, not specifically visiting dioceses that do it well, but all of the dioceses that do it well freely share their materials on the website. And I know I have my favorites, and I go to them.
The Wichita stuff is out there, like, it's all out there. I mean, you wouldn't even have to go there because they shared it. I mean, a lot of it, it's not, there's one priest who preached stewardship forever and ever and ever and ever in Wichita. That's how it got started. He was in the parish for like 30 years.
Agreed.
So it just, I mean, it just takes time. And you know, in terms of the hands-on kind of thing, after Mass what happens? So people hang around, you know, talking, and or maybe there's donut Sundays. Everybody goes to their people that they know. You know, that's our natural thing. But if we all just look at somebody who's kind of by themselves and go and talk to them, maybe invite them for, you know, but just talk to them. That goes a long ways of welcoming people into the life of the parish and little things like that. It's not rocket science.
Our time is up, but we're welcome. I welcome anybody who wants to stay and chat a little bit more. But if you have the next session you want to go to, then we gotta let you go to.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.